going to transition to talking about some of the challenges regarding access. So we will.
Okay, let me.
And we're going to leave questions at the end of the presentations.
Yeah.
And people can type them in the chat or raise their hand and we can call on you during the Q&A session.
Okay, now let me start the second one. Okay, I will talk about the several issues in the treatment of GIST in South Korea. Before talking about the problems, let me tell you several good points of Korea in the treatment of GIST. Firstly, we have one nationwide medical insurance system in Korea. So all the approved diagnostic examinations, including the imaging and also genotyping, and the standard TKIs, imatinib, sunitinib, regorafenib are all reimbursed. And the patient pay only 5% of the total fee. And secondly, the Korea is a very small country, so it takes only 3 to 4 hours from the most southern part of the country to get Seoul. So it is very easy to access the expert physicians and hospitals located in Seoul. And thirdly, we have very strong patient advocacy group like Asan GIST patient organization, as you see in below, and which plays a very important role in educating and supporting the patients. Now, let me talk about the access problem to new agents. So regarding the avapritinib, we have participated in the global trials of avapritinib, phase 1 Navigator and the phase 3 Voyager trials. And fortunately now the patients with this mutant GIST can be treated in EAP program. I'm very, very thankful for this EAP program. But still no application to Korean FDA of this drug, as far as I know. And secondly, the ripretinib, we have not participated in the phase 3 Invictus trial for the fourth line GIST, but we have participated in phase 3 Intrigue trial for the second line GIST. But after the trial closed, there is no contact about the EAP. Although I know the EAP program is ongoing in other part of the world, and I have emailed several times to the company, but there was no answer. But fortunately or unfortunately, I was heard today that the EAP program is also open to Korea. So we will do our best to bring this drug to our patients very quickly. And then as you know, most of the patients with metastatic GIST eventually fail all the available effective TKIs. So in this situation, as I presented before, the rechallenge of imatinib is an option. And I know that it's reimbursed in many countries, but in Korea, it is not reimbursed yet, even though we have conducted a phase 3 trial to demonstrate the progression-free survival benefit in phase 3 RISE study. I think it is because of no overall survival benefit demonstrated, but it is because the patients in placebo arm all could cross over to receive imatinib. And lastly, this is not an access issue, but a rigid reimbursement issues. CT scan every 3 months is mandatory for the TKI treatment, including the fourth line imatinib, to be reimbursed by the insurers. So many patients are actually concerned about the potential radiation hazard and renal dysfunction, mostly related with contrast dye with such a frequent CT scan. And this is especially an issue when patients maintained with no visible tumors for many years after imatinib treatment alone or in combination with surgical resection of residual lesions. As you see in the right side, progression-free survival curve, as I showed before, there is a plateau in period 2 for several years of no progression. So, in this period, 3 months, every 3 months, the CT scan is, too frequent. So I think that this should be also addressed, seriously. Okay, thank you. This is all, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kang. Dr. Rastogi, if you don't mind sharing some of the access issues you've identified in India.
So I'll just share a few slides as well. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So hi everyone from India, and thank you for the opportunity. So I'll discuss about newer drugs and global access issues. So thank you, Dr. Yoon and Dr. Jonathan, for such a nice talk. In 2020, everything changed after approval of avapritinib in January and ripretinib in May 2020, based upon Navigator trial and Invictus trial. So why global easy access is necessary? And this was not the case with imatinib, sunitinib, and regorafenib, which had multiple other indications. If you see, imatinib was there, like used in CML, sunitinib is there in so many cancers, regorafenib is there in colorectal cancer. So probably we got these drugs earlier than expected. So I'll just tell about how we got almost 5 patients treated on avapritinib, and we published it, how they did and how were the responses. The starting dose was, as known in Navigator trial, was 300 mg per day. So we had 5 patients with c-KIT mutation, because at that time the compassionate basis program was open for c-KIT mutations as well. And one of the patient had PTGFR D842 mutation. So 3 of our patients had partial response. One of the very surprising thing was that we had 3 patients with c-KIT mutation and they had partial response. Unfortunately, Navigator failed and the drug was not approved for c-KIT mutations. But probably I still feel that it has some activity in c-KIT mutations as well. Before ruling this out totally, I think we should think about it. We saw fewer toxicities, and as you can see, we could see periorbital puffiness, effusion, hyperbilirubinemia. And we also, so this is one of the patient who was c-KIT positive, c-KIT mutated, exon 17, and which is the activation loop. And as you can see, we had excellent responses. There is metabolic complete response. This patient had response till 6 months from avapritinib. This is our patient with the PTGFR842V mutation. This is the pre-imatinib disease. This is post-imatinib. The progression was marked in 3 months. We started on avapritinib, and this is the PET-CT after 1 year of avapritinib. There was complete response. So we had few hurdles, few cognitive deficit, but this patient did well for 1.5 years, which is quite significant. Though in one of the patient, we could see subdural hemorrhage as well. And as we know that it might happen in 1 to 2% of patients. Regarding ripretinib, we got 2 patients on ripretinib access program, and we are thankful to Decifera. And these 2 cases are unpublished. Again, these patients were taken post avapritinib. So these are the patients. As you can see, this mass with significant activity. and one omental deposit. And after 2 months, patient had significant response, metabolic response. Similarly, this patient had extensive metastasis. These patients have received every 7 lines of or 8 lines of therapies, including cabozantinib, immunotherapy. In India, we get drugs, like drugs are available without any restraint. Like if cabozantinib is available for thyroid cancer, it can be well used for GIST as well. Similarly, if immunotherapy is available for other cancers, we can use it for GIST as well, because we didn't have other therapies available. So this is like after 7 or 8 lines of therapy, and patient extensive disease, as you can see. And this is after repretinib, 2 months of repretinib, that though it was transient response, but it was superb response. So these drugs work, and like I was fortunate enough to use them. So with COVID, we have learned a lesson that there is gross inequality in everything, whatever is happening across the world. And since COVID is such a common thing right now, and it's a hot topic, so everyone is concerned about this. But regarding GIST, all of us know. Regarding rare diseases, all of us know. And I'm fond of this quote from Ayn Rand, who said that the hardest thing to explain is the thing which is glaringly evident and nobody has decided to see. So because all of us know that there are things, the disparity is quite overwhelming, and the access to these drugs is very difficult. So though like there is compassionate basis program for avapritinib available right now and not for repretinib, but even compassionate basis program has some difficulties. It takes time, at least 20 to 25 days for the drug to be available, cannot be used in sick patients. It needs educated patient. Like patient has to have English, has to do paperwork in English. So people who speak Hindi or other languages are not able to have access to these medicines. Sometimes there might be erratic supply of these drugs once the patient is on drug, and especially since COVID has set in, because a lot of times were there when flights were interrupted and those patients were like pressing us that where are the drugs. And only expert centers try expanded access program. I'm sure that the physicians who are sitting in like the peripheral centers in India, they will not know these drugs. So if these drugs are available, probably they might have used it, but going out of their way for a single patient, maybe which constitutes 1% of their practice, is difficult for them. It's mostly for local patients which stay in Delhi or some metros, but not for the people who are in periphery. So and I think because these the lack of, there is like conspicuous lack of clinical trials and poor access to these medicines in GIST. So there is apathy among physicians, like already because of being so rare a disease, the physicians, the oncologists are not well versed with the mutation testings, treatment of wild type GIST. Above that, the lack of drug makes it worse. And there's frustration among patients. Like it's like someone is having ice cream, and like if they see on nowadays, they are like all of them are there on Twitter and see the people doing well on these drugs or the trials, and they see that they are not able to have access to these drugs. It feels very bad. So a lot of times I have heard from the oncologist here that, see, if we don't have newer drugs, what is the use of mutation testing? And this actually hinders the progress, which might happen in GIST. And since in India, the other drugs are available, people end up taking nilotinib, dasatinib, nivolumab, pembrolizumab, cabozantinib, and the list is endless. So eventually they spend on something which is not actually worthwhile. And obviously for clinicians as well as patients, that desired outcome are not obtained because drug is not available. So probably there is difficult, like at both levels, there is some issue, lack of trials, fragmented procuring system. Simultaneously, there is lack of insight for rarer disease and the lack of clinical trials. In practitioners level, again, since these drugs are not available, so they don't have awareness how to use these drugs. There is inhibition for using these drugs, or even trying for access program. I think if they are available, these drugs, there will be better decision making. Obviously, the GIST people who are practicing GIST as their significant practice, there will be good satisfaction. the quality of care can be improved markedly in these patients, which feel that they are one-off cases because they are born in India. Probably that's why they are not able to have access, and they wish that they could have born elsewhere and their life could have been great. And obviously, like the both oncologist and patient satisfaction, if the disease outcomes improved, that's a great thing. So there are fewer drugs which have been available in India, but that is for more common cancers. Of course, the drug companies get more revenue out of it because lung cancer, osimertinib is available, and like we have a lot of patients in like my lung cancer colleagues who are practicing lung cancer. They always tell that the drugs are easily available for their oncology practice. So perhaps this is not my topic, but yeah, it could be all, like a lot of people have to come together to sort this out, maybe administrative, pharmaceutical support groups. And now India has fewer support groups, and I admire it that, yeah, something is being done. And obviously the associations like RIFRAF and other international organizations like Spain. And yeah, clinicians have to be proactive in these rare diseases. We need to have more medical oncologists who practice this disease religiously. Thank you. I'm really thankful for active listening. Thank you.
Wow. I hope everybody listened really carefully to what was just shared by Dr. Rastogi, Dr. Kang, and Dr. Nujim. I mean, I think we have countries all around the world here who can really identify with what they have shared today. And I think that there's a quote that Norman likes to share. I think it was recycled from a group about the ability to access a drug shouldn't be based on where you live. And it's just unfortunate to hear the LifeRaf group, we get contacted from all over the world where patients are in need of finding the next line of treatment and they don't have it available. So I'd really like to open this up to the participants today. Dr. Stogie, maybe you want to unshare your screen. We'll open it up to the group. And you can ask questions both about current treatment options, but also we can have a dialogue about what's going on with access. So Pete, why don't you begin? I see you're the first one who's raised your hand.
So first off, let me echo Sarah. That was just amazing. Okay, all of you guys. The first two were very technical and difficult presentations. But Dr. Rastogi, you just gave us a roadmap for change right there, and an Ayn Rand quote. So +2 for you, sir. That's impressive. But my question, and I'll admit right up front, this is a self-serving question because it's going to dovetail with the presentation I'm going to give tomorrow. But Dr. Nujim, you were looking at the ripretinib data, and you mentioned the placebo and the crossover. Okay, and you also mentioned, and this is not something I'm just mentioning, this is something that's been mentioned in many other places. The one could look at that and say, wow, being in the drug arm versus the placebo arm was a 64% benefit. The way of looking at that was being the placebo was a 64% detriment. Okay, so there are those who are saying that this is kind of a call to say maybe we should rethink the way we look at placebos. And a number of those patients, I think about a third, were not able to cross over and were thus harmed. And you mentioned that as well, and that has implications in the real world for clinicians as to getting patients on that drug as soon as possible and the like. And if you could just talk a little bit about that, and if you want to give any advice on it, I'm happy to hear it. But it's a huge issue for us, and I would just love to hear what any of the panelists have to say about that.
So, when designing trials, there, you always see the control arm wants to be, best standard of care, and beyond 3 lines, there was no best standard of care. So it's understandable why you would say, well, it's going to be placebo because there's no defined drug for that group. But the reality is when you look in our clinical practice, beyond 3 lines of therapy for patients that do have access to other drugs. So patients we put on either other tyrosine kinase inhibitors, or they'll just carry on the same drug like regorafenib beyond progression. And we could argue, should that be controlled? Should that be the standard arm of comparison? But this is something that is discussed internally, and And, the goal of trying to get a drug approved is, you really want to show the benefit, and you have a better likelihood of showing a benefit when comparing to placebo and comparing to an active treatment arm there. So I understand the issues, but at the end of the day, if there's no defined standard of care, I think it's going to be difficult there to argue that these patients should be receiving a drug in the control arm.
And just a teaser, if you want to know about some alternative clinical trial designs that address that very issue, tune in tomorrow to my presentation. Okay, so there you go.
We're opening up the floor. I don't see any questions in the chat or raised hands, but
I have a comment to make regarding the clinical trial design. So I was just thinking if probably avapritinib was like the when it was compared to regorafenib, had this study been single arm, like only avapritinib or placebo controlled study, then probably avapritinib would have been approved. So I mean, it has some PFS benefits. So probably the thing is that maybe like there are few patients which respond to avapritinib, and we are not able to delineate those patients, though it's a toxic medicine as compared to other drugs. But yeah, it might be effective in other patients as well.
yes, I think that reflection was definitely discussed by a few folks after, in terms of reflecting back on that design. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Fiji, please. Thank you for multitasking en route and question.
Good evening to everybody. And yes, it was wonderful to listen to Dr. Jonathan, Dr. Kang, and Dr. Samir. And of course, what Dr. Samir has said is ground reality. And we have to accept and acknowledge that these very real challenges are present, and we need to work right from there. So I know we have personally seen patients who have struggled to access the kind of medication they need. And also what Samir said was so pertinent, because today, thanks to social media, thanks to technology, many patients and caregivers and physicians are aware of a lot of the finer aspects of management, disease management. At the same time, at the other end of the spectrum, we have patients in low and middle income countries who are struggling with access to even basic technical tools. So our work is cut out for us. And it's very, very important that we work together, and very important to train and make sure our healthcare professionals are also up to date. There are no immediate solutions, but I think coming together like this, being in touch with each other, sharing all kinds of information that we have, I think that is really the need of the hour, really.
Yeah, agreed. I think these platforms like meetings like this really help us highlight the issues and find ways that we can collaborate with one another to highlight these issues to the companies, to the authorities, because it is important as we continue to support these patients, what we can do together to make our voice stronger. There is a question regarding, is there a difference in access depending on where the company is based for exams? Do Europe-based companies tend to have more translation of forms for compassionate use compared to the US-based companies? I know that we don't have any of the European physicians here today, but I don't know if the physicians on the line may know if there's a difference regarding the forms. Okay.
I have
I
tried.
think it more depends on the size of the company. The big companies have more agency in the more countries, so but the small companies they do not have much room for the better action.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Less resources.
Yeah.
Dr. Rastogi, somebody had asked, you had patients who tried avapritinib. They want to know how the patient got access to the drug.
Yeah, so we were running compassionate basis program and it's still running. So we have so far treated 6 patients, and like till now, Blueprint has been kind to us and hope it stays forever.
Right. What countries would you say have the best access to drugs with the best prices? Can other countries model themselves after these countries? It's a good question. Has anybody done that sort of analysis to get a sense of, I mean, I can imagine you know that in the United States, we're very fortunate, but maybe there's other parts of the world that have been more successful. I don't know if there's anybody from the Max Foundation team also who could comment on that. I mean, clearly these are all questions that we want to know about. There needs to be some more homework done.
Sarah, can you repeat the question? Because I had very bad internet.
Sure,
But
yeah.
I'm back now. Yeah.
So we just want to know, and I think you have some other team members also on this call, like, do you find that there are certain countries that have better access to these medications with better prices? And can these countries model themselves? I mean, I know that you guys work with different health authorities
Right.
around the world.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, we see that very often. Now, the issues here are multifactorial on different levels. There are regulatory guidelines. In a country like India, there is no federal or central health policy. For every state, there is a different policy, and it's state-wise. And there are rather stringent import conditions, and it is very difficult, therefore, to model the systems and processes in other countries. And of course, I think it's very important to for the industry, for companies to decide how much they want to support countries where number one, they face these challenges, and number two, where there are a large number of patients.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to share your experiences regarding some of these issues? I mean, I know that even Dr. Kang had talked about even getting frequent scans covered. I know I've even heard about that in South America. Have anybody in the meeting today, have you experienced that? What have you done about it?
I think many other, doctors in other countries also have, similar patients who have maintained with imatinib without the gross residual lesions for many years. And then, CT scan every 3 months will be very, problem for the patients. They are very concerned about the radiation hazards, and also we very frequently see the renal dysfunction related with contrast dye. So it is now a very important issue in our practice.
I would say in Canada, they request a scan every 6 months to get reimbursement of imatinib there.
Oh, really?
And, looking at reimbursement issues there, a scan is a couple $100, imatinib is a couple $1,000s. So, you
Right.
don't want to be giving drug for nothing there. So that's the rationale there for requesting frequent scans there.
Yeah.
Good point. What about,
Regarding
Dr.
India, can I share something there?
Sure.
Yeah. So regarding India, here imatinib and there are a lot of generics available, and the cost is so less that you can have 1 month of imatinib for the cost of one meal in a good restaurant. So it's like very cheap, and even the scans are very cheap. So there are a lot of generics. So the cost for basic things are very taken care of.
And somebody asked, can you substitute different scans like MRI versus CT scan with contrast?
Yeah,
The cost is, similar, and the radiation hazard is not so problem with MRI, but the contrast dye problem is similar. So it is not a good solution.
Okay. I want to bring up what Dr. Rastogi said about, it is so important to do mutational analysis because it helps you understand what target, what treatment is best to target your disease. But when you don't have access to those drugs, once you find that target, how challenging that becomes. And I'm wondering if maybe you can share those experiences. How, I guess, Dr. Rastogi shared in India, but maybe the other doctors on the line, is mutational testing covered in your countries? And then have you had also the experience of difficulty accessing drugs that may target a rare mutation?
So I could start with Canada. Because Canada is made up of different provinces and they each have their own health regulations. So genotyping varies from province to province. In Quebec, it's not an issue of accessibility. So patients do have access to genotyping. It's more a question of educating physicians to genotype just patients up front, because imatinib has been so long on the market, it's kind of reflex, advanced GIST automatically be put on imatinib there. So there's quite an education process that needs to be done, especially now with the arrival of new drugs like apapritinib for specific patients presenting D842V PDGFR mutated GIST. The importance of identifying those patients up front and not wasting time giving them imatinib there. So this is, it's for our province, it's more of an education process that needs to be done. But I know other provinces struggle, patients getting testing there. But hopefully, as the diagnostic technologies get cheaper and cheaper as time goes on, that's something that could be regularly done. And also, I think what's going to help, asking genotyping there up front is when we see a greater broad of different drugs targeting different mutations, then it's going to be an argument to mandatory genotype every patient.
I think that the genotyping is also important for the adjuvant or neoadjuvant imatinib treatment. The D842V mutation is resistant to imatinib, so if we do not test the genotype and give the imatinib for 3 years for the D842V mutation, then that is a disaster.
Agreed. So Norman has a point or a question that you'd like to address. Norman, if you don't mind unmuting yourself.
Yes, I think first it's a great discussion, and I've been thinking about this for 20 years now in terms of the LifeRaf group and where do we go. And my thought at the moment is that I think we need to redefine who owns the problem. If we have a patient in a particular country who cannot have access to a treatment that can extend that person's life. The technique we've used so far is to try to ask the pharma company or ask the country, can you help? I think that we need to start thinking about it differently. And one of my thoughts, and fortunately I have a staff that keeps me from doing too many crazy things, is you post a picture on the internet of the CEO of a company. And maybe next to the CEO of the company is the Minister of Health. But before the picture, you write to the CEO of a pharmaceutical company and say, listen, we have 3 patients in this country whose life is threatened because they cannot access your drug. What do you intend to do about it? Make it the problem of the person who you have manufactured a drug. What is your responsibility? And I think this is pretty controversial, and maybe other people might want to comment on it, but I think it is simply unacceptable that any patient anywhere in the world should die from a disease for which there is a treatment available. And I think that we need to reach out to the different stakeholders, and that includes the insurance companies as well, and say, what do you plan to do about it? Instead of a situation where everybody points the finger at somebody else. So that's my 3.5 cents, Sarah, to stir things up.
Thank you. Any comments, thoughts? Well, yeah.
I think the problem is quite widespread. The problem of not having drugs, because see, there are a lot of countries I know that they don't have access to sunitinib and regorafenib as well. We get patients from Afghanistan, we get patients from Nepal, we get patients from Bangladesh, and they don't have access to even third line and other testings as well. So probably we are still well off as compared to these countries. I don't know what is happening there, because there even basic mutations are not available, basic testings are not available, and even second and third lines are not available.
But I know that there have been some successes, Dr. Rastogi, of looking at some of those offline drugs at least in India. I don't know in some of those neighboring countries. So it's encouraging to know that at least you in your practice, you've been creative at cabozantinib and ponatinib and finding some of those other drug choices that might not have been approved for GIST, but they might be able to target the disease, and the companies have been willing to provide access to it. And then there's also the generics question, which I think somebody had also asked about, which is also helping to make it more affordable for patients to access. So I think there was a patient who wanted to know, being from India, if your patients have access or trust to certain generics, like there's a Dr. Reddy's that's manufactured in India. Is there ever a question with the generics regarding the trust and the quality of that drug being given to the patient?
Yeah, so regarding this question, Dr. Reddy is a good company. Like there are few companies which have international standards. So Dr. Reddy's one is good, Cipla is good. There are few other companies in which they are doing, like the patients majority do well. There is obviously no head-to-head comparison, but yeah, there are generics which have been tested multiple times. So I don't think that there is difference. We don't think while prescribing that there is difference between the original Gleevec versus the generic drugs.
Are there generics in Korea or in Canada yet? Yes, you have generic imatinib.
We have the generic imatinib, yeah, yes. It's a
And
little bit lower cost, but
Yeah.
Still not so different. So it's still big money.
And in my province, everyone switched to generic in order to drop down the cost there. So if you have an intolerance to the generic, then you have access to Gleevec. Otherwise, you don't.
Right. Somebody had asked a question, just going back to the scans point about the frequency of scans and what the experts recommend with oral and IV contrast. For example, 3 months out of 6 months out, I guess maybe it's a contrast question and the frequency of scans. Do you have any comment? Perhaps that depends on the person's case as well. Anybody care to comment?
You know, the CT scan is the best, you know, method to monitor the progression or recurrence of the disease. In the disease with the recurrence or metastasis is usually in the peritoneal cavity. So MRI is good for, you know, liver or pelvic cavity, but for the peritoneal disease, it is much worse than the CT scan. So MRI cannot replace the CT scan. So I mean, in the, you know, the early phase of treatment, I think CT scan every 3 months is very important. It's good, but as I showed it before, if the patient have in remission or in response for many years, then I think we don't need that frequent CT scan. So I like you know, the Canada 6 months CT scan is, I think that is quite acceptable.